I stood in the wings of the Grand Ballroom, my tailored navy blazer perfectly pressed as I reviewed the seating chart one final time. The event coordinator, Patricia, approached with her clipboard and an uncertain expression. "Miss Johnson, everything is set for your award presentation. I just need to confirm the family section seating. Your parents called again this morning asking about their table placement." I looked up from the carefully arranged seating assignments, meeting her confused gaze with complete calm. "There are no seats for them. They're not on the guest list." Patricia's pen froze midair as shock registered across her face. "I'm sorry. I must have misunderstood. Your parents, David and Margaret Johnson? And your sister Olivia? They're not attending." "They're not family," I said simply, my voice steady. "The people in that section are my family. My parents and sister are not." The color drained from Patricia's face, her professional composure cracking. I understood her surprise. What kind of person bans their own parents from a national awards ceremony? But she didn't know what happened 7 years ago, when those same parents drove me 5 hours to my grandparents' struggling farm in rural Pennsylvania, claiming I needed to help out for a few months, while they focused on giving my younger sister, Olivia, the spotlight she deserved without my accomplishments getting in the way. She didn't know that they drove away and never came back. She didn't know that I was 19 years old, standing in a cloud of dust on a dirt driveway, watching their car disappear over the horizon while my mother's final words echoed in my ears. "Olivia needs this chance to shine. You understand, don't you, Anna?" But I was about to walk on stage and accept one of the most prestigious awards in sustainable agriculture, surrounded by the people who actually chose to stay. And that was all the answer anyone needed. Before I tell you exactly what my parents did that led to this moment, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now because this story gets darker before it gets better, and you won't want to miss what happens when they finally realize what they've lost. Trust me, the ending is worth it. The memory of that last family dinner still burned clearly in my mind, even 7 years later. I could see myself at 19, sitting at our polished dining table in suburban Connecticut, my acceptance letter from the state university's business program folded carefully in my lap. I'd waited all evening for the right moment to share the news, a partial scholarship, enough to make my dream affordable. "So, I have some exciting news," I'd said, my voice bright with hope as I placed the letter on the table. My father, David, glanced up from his phone briefly. "That's nice, sweetheart." His attention immediately returned to the screen, his thumbs moving rapidly as he typed. My mother, Margaret, set down her wine glass with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Anna, honey, that's wonderful. We'll talk about it later." Then, without missing a beat, she turned to my younger sister. "Olivia, tell us about the tennis clinic. Did Coach Morrison say anything about the tournament?" Olivia's face lit up the way it always did when the spotlight found her. "He thinks I have a real shot at the regional finals this year. But I'd need to attend the intensive summer program in Florida. It's expensive, but Coach says I'm good enough to go pro if I commit fully." "Of course you are," Margaret said, reaching across the table to squeeze Olivia's hand. "We'll make it work. We always do." I watched my acceptance letter sit untouched between the salt and pepper shakers, gradually becoming invisible as plates and serving dishes crowded around it. The scholarship I'd worked 4 years to earn, the late-night studying, the volunteer positions, the leadership roles, all of it dismissed with 2 words. "That's nice." "The thing is," my father said, finally looking up from his phone, "Olivia's window for tennis is narrow. You understand that, right, Anna? She's at a critical age. If she doesn't pursue this now, the opportunity closes forever." "I understand," I said quietly. "But I also need—"
"Anna."
My mother's voice carried that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over the years, gentle but firm, coded in reasonableness that made disagreement feel selfish. "Your sister is more sensitive than you are. She needs more support, more encouragement. You've always been so independent, so capable of handling things on your own. Olivia needs us right now. I looked at my sister, expecting maybe a flicker of guilt or acknowledgement, but Olivia was scrolling through her phone, already bored with a conversation that wasn't directly about her tennis career or social life. At 17, she'd learned to accept our parents' devotion as her natural due, the sun around which our family orbited. "We're so proud of how self-sufficient you are," Margaret continued, finally picking up my letter and handing it back to me without reading it. "You don't need us fussing over you the way Olivia does. That's your strength, Anna. You should be proud of that." I took the letter, its corners already slightly crumpled, and returned it to my lap.
Proud.
Yes, that was exactly what I felt, proud that I'd learned not to need anything from them. Proud that I could celebrate my achievements alone in my bedroom later that night. Proud that being invisible was considered a virtue in our house. I just didn't know yet how literal that invisibility was about to become. 2 weeks after that dinner, my parents called a family meeting. The phrase alone made my stomach knot in our house. Family meetings were never about family. They were about Olivia and what Olivia needed, and how the rest of us would adjust our lives accordingly. My father sat at the head of the table, his expression grave in that particular way he reserved for important discussions. My mother perched on the edge of her chair, her hands folded in front of her like she was about to deliver difficult but necessary news. Olivia wasn't there, which should have been my first warning. "Anna, honey, we need to talk about your sister," Margaret began, her voice dripping with concern. "Is she okay?" I asked, genuine worry flickering through me despite everything. "She's struggling," my father said. "Her therapist says she's dealing with significant anxiety. It's affecting her performance on the court, her confidence, everything." I waited, knowing there was more coming. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes searching my face with an intensity that felt almost accusatory. "The thing is, sweetheart, Olivia feels like she's constantly being compared to you. Your academic success, your scholarships, your independence, it's casting a shadow over her accomplishments. She feels like she can never measure up." The words hit me like a slap. "I don't understand. I've never compared myself to Olivia. We're completely different people with different goals." "It's not about what you do," my father interjected. "It's about what your presence represents. Every time Olivia achieves something, there you are with another award, another achievement. She told her therapist she feels suffocated." I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. I was being blamed for succeeding, for existing, essentially, in the same house as my sister, while daring to have ambitions of my own. "Your grandparents need help with their farm," Margaret said, smoothly transitioning as if this had always been the point of the conversation. "They're getting older, and the property is becoming too much for them to manage. We thought it might be good for you to spend some time there, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. Help them out, take a break from the pressure of school, give Olivia some space to bloom, without the constant comparisons."
A year?
My voice came out strangled. "What about university? I'm supposed to start in the fall." "You can defer," my father said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "The farm needs help now. Your grandparents have done so much for this family. Don't you think you owe them something?" The guilt landed exactly where they'd aimed it. My grandparents were good people, and I knew their farm had been struggling. But the way my parents framed it, the casual dismissal of my entire future, the implication that my dreams were expendable while Olivia's anxiety required our collective sacrifice, it made something cold settle in my chest. "This is temporary," Margaret assured me, reaching across to pat my hand. "Just until Olivia gets back on her feet emotionally. You understand, don't you? You're the strong one, the capable one. We need you to be strong for your sister right now." I looked at their faces, earnest, reasonable, already certain of my agreement, and realized I'd been cast in a role I'd never auditioned for. The expendable daughter. The one who could be moved around like furniture to make room for the one who really mattered. "When do I leave?" I asked quietly. My mother smiled with relief. "This weekend. We've already talked to your grandparents. They're expecting you." The car ride to Pennsylvania felt like a funeral procession. I sat in the back seat surrounded by hastily packed duffel bags and boxes, my entire life condensed into whatever could fit in the trunk and back seat of my father's SUV. My mother had done most of the packing, selecting what she deemed appropriate for farm life, and leaving behind anything that hinted at the future I'd been planning. My acceptance letter sat in one of those boxes, already feeling like an artifact from someone else's life. "How long has it been since you've seen Grandma and Grandpa?" I asked, trying to fill the oppressive silence that had settled over us somewhere around the second hour. "A while," my father said, his eyes fixed on the highway. "They understand we're busy." "Maybe a couple years," Margaret added vaguely, scrolling through her phone. "They don't really enjoy traveling to Connecticut anymore." 2 years. They hadn't visited their own parents in 2 years, but somehow I was the one being sent to assuage family guilt. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I swallowed it down along with everything else I wasn't allowed to say. "Will you visit me?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "While I'm there?" "Of course, sweetheart," my mother said without looking up. "Once Olivia's tournament season settles down." Which meant no. Which meant I was being deposited and forgotten. The landscape gradually shifted from suburbs to rural farmland, the spaces between houses growing wider, the buildings becoming older and more weathered. When we finally turned onto the long dirt driveway leading to my grandparents' property, dust billowing up behind us, I felt something in my chest constrict. The farmhouse looked smaller than I remembered from childhood visits, the paint more faded, the porch sagging slightly, the barn in the distance listing to one side like it was tired of standing. My grandparents emerged from the house, their smiles warm but uncertain, as if they weren't quite sure why their granddaughter was arriving with her entire life packed in garbage bags. My father had the trunk open before he'd even turned off the engine. "We need to get back before dark," he announced, already pulling out my bags with efficient haste. "You won't stay for dinner?" my grandmother asked, her voice hopeful. "I made pot roast." "We really can't," Margaret said, her smile apologetic but her body language already angled toward the car. "Long drive back, and Olivia has an early practice tomorrow." They unloaded my belongings in less than 5 minutes, piling everything on the porch like they were dropping off donations at Goodwill. My mother gave me a quick hug that felt more like a formality than affection. My father squeezed my shoulder and told me to be good and help out. Then they were gone. I stood in the driveway, my grandparents on either side of me, and watched the SUV retreat down the dirt road. The dust cloud it kicked up hung in the air long after the vehicle had disappeared, and I kept staring at that empty road, waiting for them to realize what they'd done and come back. They didn't come back. The dust settled. The silence pressed in. And my grandmother's gentle hand on my shoulder was the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. "Come inside, sweetheart," she said softly. "You must be exhausted." I wasn't exhausted. I was abandoned. But I followed her into the house anyway, because there was nowhere else to go. The first morning, I woke to roosters crowing at 5 a.m. and the realization that my childhood memories of the farm had been heavily filtered through nostalgia and ignorance. The reality was far harsher. The roof leaked in 3 places. The ancient tractor in the barn hadn't run in 2 years. Half the fence line was held together with wire and prayers, and my grandfather's arthritic hands shook when he tried to hammer in a loose board. My grandmother cooked meals that stretched ingredients to their absolute limit: pasta with butter and canned vegetables, soup made from chicken bones boiled 3 times over. They were poor. Not charmingly rustic or quaintly simple. Actually, desperately poor. "How much does Dad send you?" I asked one evening, watching my grandmother water down the dish soap to make it last longer. She glanced at my grandfather, something unspoken passing between them. "Enough," she said carefully. "Grandma." She sighed, setting down the bottle. $200 a month. He says that's all he can spare with Olivia's training expenses. $200. My parents spent more than that on a single dinner at Olivia's favorite restaurant. The tennis clinic in Florida that my sister was attending cost $15,000 for the summer. But their own parents, the people who'd raised my father, who'd helped put him through college, got $200 a month. I called home that night, standing on the porch, where I could get a single bar of cell service. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hi Mom, it's Anna. Just wanted to check in. Things are pretty rough here. The farm needs a lot more work than I expected. Can we talk about maybe coming home sooner? Call me back." She didn't call back. I tried again 2 days later. And then 3 days after that. I sent text messages that went unanswered. I tried my father's phone and got similar silence. Finally, after 2 weeks, my mother responded with a text. "Anna, we talked about this. Olivia needs space. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. We'll talk when the time is right." When the time is right. As if there was some arbitrary deadline after which I'd be allowed back into my own family. I stood in the field that afternoon, my hands blistered from trying to repair fence posts, my body aching from physical labor I'd never experienced before, and I finally understood. This wasn't temporary. There was no plan to bring me home. They'd driven me here, unloaded my bags, and erased me from their lives as cleanly as deleting a contact from a phone. I was the problem that had been solved, the shadow that had been removed so their golden child could finally shine without obstruction. That night, I lay in the small bedroom that had become my prison, staring at the water-stained ceiling and listening to my grandparents' worried whispers through the thin walls. They didn't understand why I was here either, but they were too kind to say it out loud, that my parents had dumped me on them like unwanted furniture, then washed their hands of both of us. The acceptance letter was still in my bag, the scholarship deadline 2 months away. I could defer like my parents suggested. I could wait for them to decide I was allowed to have a life again. Or I could accept that the life I'd planned was gone, and the family I'd tried so hard to please had never really wanted me at all. It was my grandfather who finally told me the truth. We were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over fields that desperately needed tending, when he spoke into the comfortable silence we'd developed over the past month. "You know, your father called us about 6 months ago," he said, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "Asked if we'd be willing to take you in for a while. Said you needed a break from the pressure of school, that you were burning yourself out." I turned to look at him, my stomach dropping. 6 months ago? He nodded slowly. "We said of course. We love having you here, Anna. Always have." But the way he talked about it. He trailed off, choosing his words carefully. It didn't sound like it was for your benefit. It sounded like he was solving a problem. My grandmother pushed open the screen door, carrying her own coffee, and settled into the rocking chair beside us. "We should have said something sooner," she said quietly. "But we kept hoping we were wrong." "Wrong about what?" They exchanged another one of those long, married couple looks that contained entire conversations. Finally, my grandmother spoke. "Your parents have been promising to visit us for 3 years, Anna. 3 years of next month and once things calm down and after Olivia's tournament season. They came for Christmas 2 years ago, stayed for 4 hours, and left early because Olivia wanted to get back for a party. They don't call," my grandfather added. "We call them. And half the time, they're too busy to talk for more than 5 minutes." I felt something cracking inside me, all the careful explanations I'd been making for my parents' behavior beginning to crumble. "But they're helping you with the farm, right? Financially?" My grandmother's laugh was bitter. $200 a month. "Your grandfather worked in the factory for 40 years, helped put David through college, and we get $200 a month while they fund tennis clinics and private coaches and God knows what else for Olivia. We asked for help fixing the roof last year," my grandfather said. "David said he'd look into it. That was 14 months ago. The buckets in the attic are still catching rainwater." The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture I'd been refusing to see. When he called about me coming here, what exactly did he say? My grandmother set down her coffee, her expression pained. "He said Olivia was struggling with comparisons to you. that she needed space to develop her own identity without her accomplished older sister overshadowing her. He said you were happy to help us out, that you wanted a break from academic pressure. She paused. He made it sound like this was your idea, Anna. It wasn't, I whispered. We know that now, my grandfather said gently. We've been watching you these past weeks. You're not someone taking a break. You're someone who's been exiled. The word hung in the air between us. Harsh, accurate, undeniable. They asked us how long we needed help. My grandmother continued, her voice trembling slightly. We said maybe you could stay this summer, help with planting. Your father said that would be perfect, maybe longer if we needed it. Like you were equipment he was lending out, not his daughter. I thought about all the unanswered calls, the brief text message, the way they'd unloaded my bags like they couldn't escape fast enough. The scholarship I was supposed to defer indefinitely. The future I was supposed to put on hold while Olivia got her chance to shine. They're not coming back for me, are they? I said, though it wasn't really a question anymore. My grandparents didn't answer, but their silence was confirmation enough. I'd been stored away, tucked into the corner of their struggling farm like an embarrassment they didn't want to deal with, free storage for the daughter who'd gotten in the way. This is where everything changes. This is the moment Anna stops being a victim and becomes the architect of her own empire. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what she builds in the next 7 years will blow your mind. The revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's better than that. The morning after that conversation, I stopped waiting for my life to resume and started building a new one. I'd spent weeks feeling sorry for myself, mourning the future I'd lost, and waiting for parents who were never coming back. But sitting on that porch, listening to my grandparents describe years of broken promises and casual neglect, something had shifted inside me. My parents had discarded both of us, but unlike them, I wasn't going to abandon the people who actually needed me. I started with research. The local library had computers and Wi-Fi, and I spent hours learning everything I could about small farm economics, sustainable agriculture, and direct-to-consumer sales models. My business scholarship might have been deferred, but the knowledge I'd accumulated wasn't going anywhere. What are you working on? My grandmother asked one afternoon, finding me surrounded by printed articles and handwritten notes at the kitchen table. Grant applications, I said, looking up with the first genuine smile I'd felt in weeks. There's a USDA program for young farmers implementing sustainable practices, and a state agriculture grant for farms transitioning to organic methods. We qualify for both. My grandfather appeared in the doorway, interest flickering across his weathered face. We've never done organic. That's the point, I said, spreading out my research. The market for organic, locally grown produce is exploding. People want to know where their food comes from. They'll pay premium prices for it. We just need to reach them. Over the next 3 months, I transformed myself from an abandoned daughter into a farm entrepreneur. I photographed our fields at golden hour and created Instagram and Facebook pages showcasing heritage farms, return to traditional, sustainable methods. I wrote grant applications with the same intensity I'd once applied to scholarship essays. I designed a simple website and reached out to local restaurants about farm-to-table partnerships. My grandmother watched me set up grow lights for starter plants in the old greenhouse, shaking her head in wonder. Your parents have no idea what they threw away, do they? Their loss, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. The first grant came through in late spring, $15,000 for implementing rotational grazing and organic pest management. I stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, staring at the approval email while my grandparents looked on with cautious hope. This is real? My grandfather asked, his voice cracking slightly. It's real, I confirmed. And I've got 3 more applications pending. By summer, we had our first farmers market booth. By fall, 2 local restaurants had signed contracts for weekly produce deliveries. The farm's social media following had grown to 5,000 people who loved our behind-the-scenes content and my grandmother's occasional recipe videos. I was up before dawn, and worked until sunset, my hands permanently stained with soil, my back aching from physical labor. But I was building something real. Something mine. Something that mattered. My phone still sat silent. No calls from Connecticut, no messages asking how I was doing. But I'd stopped checking it obsessively. I had fence posts to repair, seedlings to transplant, and a farm to save. My parents had meant to bury me out here in the middle of nowhere, hide me away where I couldn't cast shadows on their precious Olivia. Instead, they'd given me room to grow. 18 months after I'd arrived with nothing but hastily packed bags and a deferred scholarship, the farm turned its first real profit in over a decade. Not just breaking even, actually profitable. The organic certification had come through, our restaurant contracts had doubled, and our online farm share program had a waiting list. My grandfather cried when I showed him the quarterly numbers. "I thought we'd lose this place," he said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Thought we'd die watching it crumble around us." "Not on my watch," I said, squeezing his shoulder. But I noticed things that worried me. My grandmother moved slower, her breath growing short when she climbed the porch steps. My grandfather's hands shook more frequently, and he'd started forgetting small things, appointments, conversations we'd had the day before. They were in their late 70s now, and the years were catching up with them in ways that made my chest tight with concern. Which was why I wasn't completely surprised when they asked me to drive them into town to meet with their lawyer. "We need to discuss the future," my grandmother said, her tone serious in a way that made me nervous. The lawyer's office was small and cluttered, photos of family covering every available surface. Martin Henderson had known my grandparents for 40 years, and he greeted them with the familiarity of old friendship before turning to me with an appraising look. "So you're the granddaughter who saved the farm," he said. "I'm the granddaughter who lives there," I corrected, uncomfortable with the praise. "Exactly," my grandfather said, pulling out a folder of documents. "Which is why we're here." Martin laid out several papers on the desk between us, and I recognized property deeds, tax documents, and legal forms I didn't fully understand. My grandmother reached across and took my hand. "Anna, we want to transfer 70% ownership of the farm to you," she said. Effective immediately. I stared at them, my brain struggling to process what I was hearing. I can't. That's your legacy. That's supposed to go to Dad." "Your father hasn't set foot on this property in 3 years," my grandfather said, his voice firm. "He sent us $200 a month while spending thousands on tennis lessons. He dumped you here like you were trash he needed to dispose of, then forgot about all of us. You're the one who saved this place," my grandmother added, her grip on my hand tightening. "You're the one who got up at dawn every single day. You're the one who learned sustainable farming and wrote grant applications and built a business from nothing. You're the one who stayed, Anna." The words hit me harder than I expected. The one who stayed. In a family that had made me feel expendable my entire life, I'd finally found people who saw my worth. "Your father will inherit the remaining 30% when we pass," Martin explained, his tone professional. "But the controlling interest goes to you. The decision-making power. The future of this farm." "He'll contest it," I said quietly. "Let him try," my grandfather said, steel in his voice I'd never heard before. "We're of sound mind, we have excellent legal counsel, and we have 18 months of documentation showing who actually runs this operation. You've earned this, Anna. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I looked down at the papers, at the legal language that would make me the primary owner of Heritage Farm, and felt tears burning behind my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that I'd finally found where I belonged. "Where do I sign?" I asked. 5 years later, Heritage Farm was no longer just a farm. It was a brand, a movement, and a blueprint for rural revitalization that other operations across the country were trying to replicate. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built through relentless work, smart partnerships, and a willingness to innovate that most traditional farmers found terrifying. We'd expanded to 50 acres of certified organic produce, added a small herd of grass-fed cattle, and built a commercial kitchen where my grandmother's recipes became value-added products sold in specialty stores across 3 states. But the real breakthrough came when I started consulting. Other struggling farms had watched our resurrection with a mixture of envy and hope. They started reaching out. Could I look at their business model? Review their grant applications? Help them transition to sustainable practices? What began as informal advice over coffee evolved into a legitimate consulting business, and suddenly I was traveling to farms across the region, teaching others how to survive in an industry that was systematically destroying small operators. You're 26 years old, and you're teaching people twice your age how to run their businesses, my grandmother said one morning, pride evident in every word. She'd grown frilier over the years, but her mind remained sharp, and she'd become my most trusted advisor. I'm teaching them what desperation taught me, I said, reviewing my calendar. 3 speaking engagements this month, including one at the State Agricultural Conference. The speaking engagements had started small, local farming associations, community colleges, for H chapters. But word spread about the young woman who transformed a dying farm into a thriving enterprise, and suddenly I was being invited to larger venues. Agricultural journals interviewed me. Farming podcasts featured my story. A documentary crew spent a week filming our operation. I never mentioned why I'd come to the farm in the first place. As far as the public knew, I'd chosen this life, a passionate young entrepreneur dedicated to sustainable agriculture. The truth about my parents' abandonment stayed buried, a private pain I shared only with my grandparents and the therapist I'd finally started seeing. Then came the email that changed everything. I was in the barn, helping repair an irrigation line, when my phone buzzed with a message from the National Sustainable Agriculture Foundation. My hands were covered in grease, so I almost ignored it. Almost. Dear Ms. Johnson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as this year's recipient of the Horizon Award for Innovation in Sustainable Farming. I read the email 3 times before the words fully registered. The Horizon Award. It was one of the most prestigious honors in American agriculture, typically given to researchers with decades of experience or large operations with massive funding. Not to 26-year-old women running small family farms in rural Pennsylvania. The ceremony would be in Chicago. Black tie. National media coverage. They wanted me to give a speech about my journey and vision for the future of American agriculture. I called my grandmother from the barn, my voice shaking. I won, I said simply. She knew immediately what I meant. Oh, sweetheart. Your grandfather would have been so proud. He'd passed peacefully 8 months earlier, long enough to see the farm thriving but not long enough to see this final validation. I wish he was here, I whispered. He is, she said firmly. He's in every fence post you repaired, every field you planted, every life you've changed. That's legacy, Anna. That's what matters. The award committee would send me details about the ceremony, including guest list protocols and family seating arrangements. And that's when I knew I had a decision to make, one that had been 7 years in the making. The call from my mother came 3 weeks before the ceremony, the first time I'd heard her voice in over 2 years.
Anna.
Sweetheart, we just heard about your award. We're so incredibly proud of you. The false warmth in her voice made my skin crawl. I stood in the newly renovated farmhouse kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, and said nothing. We'll fly out for the ceremony, of course, she continued, bulldozing through my silence. Your father, Olivia, and me. This is such a huge accomplishment for our family. Olivia's so excited to see you. She's been telling everyone her sister is receiving a national award. Our family. As if they hadn't erased me from it 7 years ago. I'll send you the event details, I said flatly, and hung up before she could respond. I didn't send the details. I sent nothing. Which brought us to now, the Grand Ballroom in Chicago, 30 minutes before I was supposed to accept the most important recognition of my career. Patricia, the event coordinator, had just informed me that my parents were at the registration desk, causing a scene about their missing seats. They're insisting they're immediate family, Patricia said, her tablet clutched nervously. Should I? No, I said firmly. They're not on the list because they're not family. If they continue to cause problems, have security escort them out. My phone buzzed. My mother, I answered, stepping into a quiet corner of the backstage area. Anna, what is going on? Margaret's voice was shrill with indignation. They're saying we're not on the guest list. This is obviously a mistake. We're your parents, for God's sake. It's not a mistake, I said calmly. Don't be ridiculous. We flew all the way here to support you. You didn't support me, I interrupted, my voice steady and cold. You abandoned me on a dirt road 7 years ago because I was inconvenient. You sent $200 a month to your own parents while spending thousands on Olivia's tennis streams. You ignored my calls, my messages, my existence. You dumped me like trash and forgot about me until I became successful enough to be useful again. That's not fair. We were trying to help Olivia. And now I'm trying to help myself, I said. By making sure the people who are actually in that ballroom are the ones who earned the right to be there. The farmers I've mentored. The colleagues who collaborated with me. My grandmother, who took in the granddaughter you discarded and loved her unconditionally. Those are the people celebrating with me tonight. How could you do this to your family? Margaret's voice cracked, finally showing real emotion. I took a breath, feeling 7 years of pain and anger and hard-won peace settling into my bones. I didn't do anything to my family, Mom. My family is already here, sitting in those seats, waiting to celebrate with me. You and Dad and Olivia? You're just the people who gave birth to me. That's biology, not family. And biology doesn't earn you a seat at my table anymore. I hung up before she could respond. Patricia appeared at my elbow, her expression concerned. Security escorted them out. They're demanding to speak with you. Block their numbers, I said. All 3 of them. She nodded, making notes on her tablet, then looked up with something like admiration. Your grandmother is in the front row. She asked me to tell you she loves you and she's proud of you. My eyes burned, but I smiled. Tell her I love her too. And that grandpa would have loved this. The stage manager gave me the 5-minute warning. I smoothed down my blazer, checked my appearance one final time, and walked toward the stage entrance. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see the ballroom filled with faces I recognized, farmers whose operations I'd helped save, journalists who'd told my story, agricultural innovators who'd become genuine friends and mentors. And in the front row, my grandmother, wearing her best dress and beaming with pride.
No Margaret. No David. No Olivia.
Just the family I'd chosen, and who had chosen me back. The announcer's voice boomed through the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's Horizon Award recipient, Anna Johnson. I walked on stage to thunderous applause, the spotlight bright and warm, and felt nothing but peace. 7 years ago, my parents had tried to bury me on a failing farm, to hide me away where I couldn't outshine their golden child. Instead, they'd planted me exactly where I needed to grow. And I had grown into something they could never diminish again, someone who knew her worth, who built her own legacy, and who understood that the only validation that mattered was the kind you earned through showing up, day after day, for the people who actually valued you. I reached the podium, looked out at my chosen family, and began to speak. I want to know something. Did you root for Anna? Because if you did, you're part of something bigger. A community that celebrates people who refuse to stay broken, who build empires from abandonment, who understand that family is chosen, not given. Subscribe to join us. And comment below, what would you say to someone who discarded you if you ever got your moment? Let's celebrate Anna together.